talk about wealth of knowledge. You bring it all together.
Put the work in now to get yourself structured and organized and documented.
We need to grow this top line.
There is no one size fits all for this industry.
Hey there, thanks for checking out an episode of the Restoration Masterclass, sponsored by Encircle and brought to you by CNR, of course. Today, I am very excited to be talking to Mike Bevilacqua, who is the founder and chief culture officer of Mammoth Restoration. He and I have been friends for a while, and he's been a great mentor to me. And he is huge on company culture. That is one of his core beliefs in running his business, is creating a very healthy company culture. So we're here today to marry the idea of a healthy company culture and profitability and how those go together. So Mike, thank you very much for joining me. So share a little bit about yourself and the background of Mammoth for those who don't know you.
So we're on our 17th year. I started out 2006, September 11th, 2006. And I didn't have any background in the trades at all. I came from a Wall Street background. And so right now in Mammoth, we have 7 locations in Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and we have about 85 people-ish, give or take.
Okay. That's quite a few. So I know when you talk about the culture at Mammoth, you use this term called a Mammoth culture. So what does that term mean to you personally?
Okay, so we call it the Mammoth Way, and it starts with where you want to go. So we always talk about want to be the Olympic champion of this industry, and so we talk about think about any Olympic champion. I used to wrestle, so I know a bunch of Olympic champions, and these guys they're driven first of all, but they're also very disciplined, and they diet properly, sleep properly, train properly, but more importantly, they have really strong workout partners that are challenging them to get them better. So we're kind of want to be that type of thing, but in the restoration world. So the Mammoth culture, we call what's an HPT, or a high performing team. Our definition of a high performing team is where the individual will do whatever it takes not to let their team down. All right. And then also we want to talk about having A players, or people who want to become A players. And our A players are clearly defined. They share our values and they meet the expectations of their role. That doesn't mean an A player doesn't mean you're a superstar. I mean, you could be, but it means that you share our values and you're meeting the expectations of your role, because we want to think about all the stakeholders that are involved in what we do, internal stakeholders as well as external stakeholders. And in order for those stakeholders to do their jobs properly, that means you have to do your job properly. And so we've really focused around a lot about the Mammoth Way. It's and we talk about our values are not just words on a wall and you forget about them. It is something that we literally recruit to, on board, we train, we promote, and we exit people based upon how they're fitting in with those values, irrespective of how well they're doing. Because they can be very good at being a project manager, but if they're not a cultural fit, it's going to end up becoming toxic to your organization. I have an example that might help, because I imagine a lot of your listeners, they're learning this, because I didn't know all this stuff. I had to learn this stuff. Everything I'm ever going to talk to you, it wasn't innate. I had to learn it. So I'll give you an example. I had a guy that was really a friend of mine, and he came into our company. He actually invested in the company, and one of my best friends is on my team, and yet one of our values is dependability, and being dependable. And we were struggling because things weren't getting done on time. And I asked him a question, a really simple question, and I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is dependability to being an effective leader? And he gave me an answer of an 8, and I asked him, well, why? And he explained to me for about 90 minutes, no kidding, well articulated, well thought out. And then I asked another simple follow-up question. Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate yourself? And he said 6. I'm like, okay, well, I actually grade you a 6 as well. So just so we're clear, because no one's perfect, I'm looking for a 9.95 out of being dependable. And an 8's not going to cut it. and a 6 definitely isn't going to cut it. Now, just because this person wasn't my level of dependability doesn't make him a wrong or bad person. It's just not the right person for your company, because you're going to be clashing all the time. And this person's still one of my best friends and still an investor in the company. And so that's how important this stuff is, the Mammoth Way. So going back to the wrestling analogy, to be the best at anything, you've got to be incredibly disciplined and intentional about it. And that's a big part of the Mammoth Way. And I coach too, because I'm talking about behaviors is what I focus on all the time. The behaviors will lead to the outcomes. And so, because you can have the outcomes you want, but not the behaviors that you want. And that can be a very unstable way to grow your company. And I'm living proof, because we used to operate that way, and we had to really change. And it really started right there by clearly defining our values and holding people to those values.
Okay, so thank you for the wonderful segue. So let's talk about, since you've been more intentional with the culture and HPT, your teams, what they look like, how have you seen the revenue and profitability overall of Mammoth grow and change in those years that you've been way more intentional about this?
So we were not in a good spot. And I will tell you, we have more than doubled the size of our company. And I changed my title to Chief Culture Officer about 4 years ago, I think. And we've more than doubled in those 4 years. And we're a pretty good sized company at the time. And our profitability has tripled.
Okay. I loved your point about, I think people get caught up in when you have an employee that's not a cultural fit, they're not bad people. Like you said, people need to not get caught up in that. Just every company is different and has a different culture, and it is about finding the right fit. So how are you finding people that are the right fit? I mean, this is a different type of culture than a lot of restoration companies talk about. It's rare, honestly, that I hear people talk about, we're a high powered team. We're moving forward. We are dependable. Obviously restoration companies should be dependable, but you are looking at high performing teams. Like, I can think of a lot of individuals that I know on your team, especially in your upper leadership team, and they are like you, like we are go, 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 going, and we're getting it done and all of that. So how do you find those people? How do you make sure that people fit into your culture as you're kind of maybe going through the hiring process even?
This is the most important question, because to get the results that you want, it all starts in the interview chair, period, the end. Because if you have the right people who are fit, remember, they're not grinding the gears, then they're going to be the ones pulling in the oars in the same direction. And that's going to create a smooth operation. And your team wants to work in a smooth operation, and so do your customers, and so do your external stakeholders. So unfortunately, I wish I could give you a really simple answer, because I've spent a lot of time on this topic for years. It's the grunt work. There is so much grunt work. I mean, we met when you were recruiting for us.
Yeah.
And you got to kiss a lot of frogs till you find that prince. And you got to be intentional, because most people, I will tell you, where we really started to change is we stopped hiring out of need and we hired out of want. Because if somebody is not a fit, you know where this is going to end up.
Yeah. And
it's going to end up causing a lot of havoc for a lot of people internally and externally. So we spent a lot of time, especially on the interviewing. We have panel interviews, a lot of background checks we do. We do personality profiles as well. We do a lot of reference checks. And so those are the things that, it's not a perfect process. Hiring is not perfect. That's why you've heard the expression, you're slow to hire, quick to fire.
Yep.
And so I'm not a big fan of firing, but the point is that most people, when they're going through the culture, the process, the way you're interviewing, the questions that you're asking, and we're asking questions around those values to see where they fit on that. On a scale, how dependable are you? I mean, we're asking those questions. I can't say, are you dependable? Who's going to say no? You got to ask the right question to figure out how. And a lot of times it comes up just in conversation about whatever. Most of my keep-aways, like say no, this like a first person sounded really good until they said that. I mean, it could have been just you're talking about the ball game or something, just a situational thing. And those are those little flags that you've got to pay attention to. Because, being in this business for almost 17 years, I don't want to say I've seen it all, because you always find something new, but you have so many experiences that you get to draw upon. Like, wait a second, that sounds just like so-and-so. And I went through this, like that person. I'm sure they're wonderful. They're probably great at producing the work, but maybe they're not very good at following up and making phone calls to customers. Because the final product may look good, but if it's a bad customer experience, that's going to infect and hijack a lot of people's days. So I wish I can give you a better answer. It's a lot of grunt work. It's kind of like sales. If you're selling properly, you should have what does your ideal target market look like from a customer point of view? It should be the same thing with your team. And sales is a grudging process. And one of the reasons why a lot of companies struggle is because they don't put the energy behind the hiring process. They hire, well, that person sounds good, let's go. And that person, when I say infects, through maybe no maliciousness whatsoever, they just don't know what they're doing, or they do something the wrong way that it doesn't follow your process. And then it just affects your project manager, your salesperson, the adjuster, and it just bleeds. And then it also bleeds profitability, because now you got to stop what you're doing to fix that problem when you could be doing something that's more productive. And I learned the one thing as a society, and the one thing I preach constantly is we're so ingrained to do something extra, do more. And if I could pass on to your audience, is if you want to really grow, it's what you got to stop doing. And if you can stop doing things, like that's what's going to help you propel. So that was a really big thing. And part of the stopping is stop just taking anybody. Stop tolerating poor performance. Hold people to the expectation. If they're not going to be a fit, I mean, I've asked hundreds and hundreds of people, how long does it take you to determine if somebody's going to make it? Do you know what the average answer is?
I feel like on day one, practically.
Well, 2-3 weeks, right? 2-3 weeks. Then why are they there 6 months later? Right? Because we're like, well, somebody's got to do the work. And that's probably the number one problem. That was our problem. And we stopped, and we started saying, you know what? I'd rather not fill the position. I'd rather not take the work than deal with what I know I'm going to deal with on the back end, which could be a bad customer experience or throwing money at a job. I've seen that movie so many times, like Groundhog Day.
Okay, so talking about these high-performing teams and how hard I know that your team works, how do you also, where in your culture is the fun part, or making sure that people aren't burning out? What do you have ingrained in your culture so that people don't burn out? Because restoration does absolutely breed that, especially cats. I know you've had teams in Florida and all that as well.
This is the hard one, believe it or not. So when you're dealing with, think about, I'm not sure this is an actual fact, but I've been told this, it makes a lot of sense. One of the reasons they put down racehorses when they break their leg is because they don't know how to stop running. Right. And so a lot of our guys, they're just used to going hard. And I would literally sit there and say, I'm sending you and your wife away for 4 or 5 days. Right? Something like that, or like just little things of appreciation. I use this app called Thanks, THNK, and I'm always sending send them to dinner for their family, just little things like that. They want to feel appreciated, but you got to lighten up and say, like, there are times when we just went through a pretty big weather event during Christmas, and you got to understand, like, your guys, they're human, and you got to give them a break. And we're constantly doing temperature checks about that. How's it going? No, you go home. You do this. Like, we've had our guys who are in Florida for, I don't know, 3 months, whatever. And said, no, you're going to go home for a couple of days. Just go get rest. Go spend time with your family. We can probably do more for sure, but we're constantly on top of that. And this is the part that I think important is from the cultural standpoint. My big thing is I'm basically out of the day-to-day operation of the business. Been there for a couple of years. But just the one part that I focus on is the feedback between the manager and team member. And I read every single one-on-one note that a team member has with the manager, or say, hey, listen, that guy hasn't had one in a while. You need to check in on him or her to see how she's doing. And so she's going through X, Y, and Z. So that's one way to stay on top of it, because that kind of bubbles things up.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I'm curious how also I've seen in restoration companies where there's been somebody else over culture, not the owner. And I do know that I think culture starts at the top, right? So when you decided to take over the culture piece versus hiring somebody, what was kind of the thought process there?
Well, first of all, I didn't really focus on culture then. This is when I realized I had a consultant come in, and he went through this whole sorts of stuff that says, listen, you go, you have things, I consult billion-dollar companies, and that you have systems and processes that these guys would be jealous of. I'm like, oh, this is great. He says, he goes, but he goes, you're the problem. And I'm like, well, no kidding. And so, so the culture is like, you got to make sure that everybody knows what we call it the process map or the workflow. They need to know the process. And he goes, then he also said that the culture, that's yours and only yours. If you want to grow and scale, you know exactly what you want. You know your culture. And so you got to be the defender, the keeper of the culture. And that's why my role really lives in the HR role. And keep in mind, HR to me 6 years ago was fill out this W-2 and let's go, or W-9, whatever it's called. And now because of the pain that I was going through, I realized I had to fix the culture. Culture is not something you just talk about. It actually has to be driven and lived, and it's got to be modeled as well. And it starts at the top. And you can't say, do as I say, not as I do.
No, especially in restoration, in anything, but
Any
restoration,
business.
yes. All right, Mike, well, thank you. Anything else that you want to add before we wrap it up?
Yes, a little shout out to you. I dealt with I hired a PR company to do some backgrounds, just some deeper stuff into us, to do various verticals and value propositions and whatnot. And in doing so, they actually mentioned your magazine as being one that is highly read from these various verticals that we're going to. So I thought you should be very proud of yourself to see how well you're doing and how much of a reach you have.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate all the help that you've given me along the way as well. And thank you for your expertise here. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you at shows this year.
All right. God bless. Good.